Hello, all. It's Monday, April 19th, 2021, and this is our live podcast and live stream that we do on news topics on Mondays. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, hey, you folks are normally live streaming this podcast in the mornings, which we normally do, normally at 10 a.m. Every weekday except Wednesday when we go at 9 a.m. But today it's 12:21 p.m. here in the Central Time Zone in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I find myself, because we wanted to wait for the opening or for the closing statements in the Derek Chauvin trial to finish from the prosecutors. And then we led a online prayer time for people from around the country for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the amount of time that Derek Chauvin had his knee on the body of George Floyd when he killed him. And so each day at noon, right here, wherever you're watching this, and if you're listening on the audio version only, you'll have to go over to the social streams to watch these, or go to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/voteCommonGood, and you can watch the 9 minute and 29 second prayer. We had Mia Pace let us in a little music. Michael Waters gave us an introduction and a prayer. And then we sat together for about 3 minutes in joining our minds, our hearts, and our prayer together in solidarity with these jurors. Because look, we try to do at this podcast is to ask people to consider what the common good is when they look at the news, and to see it and to find it and to understand it. And for the jurors to now have to consider what the common good is for not only the justice that George Floyd deserves, for the justice that Derek Chauvin deserves, for the justice that the state of Minnesota, who is the lead plaintiff in this case, deserves, and then for the larger justice that all of us in this state, all of us in this country, people around the world need to have. It's an incredible burden for these jurors. You might know that there were originally 15 who were selected, and then one was let so there were 3 alternates, then one was let go, and then 2 alternates have stayed all through the trial. And when the jury goes to deliberate here in just a moment, if they haven't already, then those 2 alternate jurors will be released. And then 12 people will take it upon themselves to render a verdict, to render a judgment. It's an incredible burden to bear. And so I just want you to be thinking about those people. We'll join together at noon Central Time each day that they're in deliberations to consider this. So if you'd like to join us for 9 minutes and 29 seconds of reflection and solidarity and prayer for them, do that at noon each of these days. There are many people like me who are hoping that this jury trial, jury deliberation goes quickly, that it won't be a long process by which it takes for them to render guilty verdicts. It seems to me that from what I heard in the opening statements today, or the closing statements today, and the jury instructions from the judge today, that Derek Chauvin has been proven by the state of Minnesota to be guilty of 2nd-degree murder, 3rd-degree murder, and I guess 3rd-degree manslaughter. And those are all different charges, which are kind of complicated. I hope at some point we can have a trial attorney on to sort of explain why that happens. I'm a little unclear how a person can be charged with 3 separate crimes in the same action. I don't know how that works. The jury will have to figure that out. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of pressure on jurors. I have been a juror once, and it was in a criminal felony case, not of the same magnitude, but it was complicated. It took us 5 days of jury deliberation to come to a guilty verdict. It was hard to do. And in the end, all of us agreed that guilty verdict was the right verdict, but getting there took a long time, and the stakes were not nearly this high, and the counts were not nearly this complicated. So I don't know anything about how this is going to go. I will just simply say, if you feel yourself being worried, being concerned about what's happening, it may have a lot to do with just the actual process of what it takes to write up jury verdicts, to get everyone to agree to them, and to do the process quickly and accurately. I just don't expect that something of this complication will be done in hours. I think it will definitely take days. Even if the jury is is in agreement. It takes a while. One of the things prosecutors are concerned about in a judge is that a jury verdict doesn't come back too quickly. There's just a process that you have to go through to be sure that it's been carefully deliberated. And then you might know that after a verdict is rendered, especially if it's guilty verdicts, then the defense wants to talk to and interrogate for legal purposes the jurors on how they responded. After our case, I was then called by the defense team and asked to give my account of how the deliberations went. Was anyone pressured? Was anyone forced? Was there anything untoward that went on in the jury room that someone would need to know about? These are really complicated ways. And it's also something we need to remember in our justice system, and that is that the level of sort of common sense street justice that you would understand what's right and wrong is not always the same thing as what the legal requirements are by the law. And if you listen today to the jury instructions, either given by the judge or then those laid out by the state prosecutor, then you know that there's these burdens that have to be met and very specific claims of causality and of responsibility. And that's different. It's not simple. Our judicial system is built around statutes and laws that someone violates, which is often different than what happens in the morality. So this is why the city of Minneapolis paid $27 million in a wrongful death suit, even before Derek Chauvin's trial had started, because at the civil level, there's a different standard of burden than there is at the criminal level. All that to say, these are complicated matters, and there's a lot that's at stake and a lot that's going on. So these 12 ordinary people who just received a summons in the mail to be in a jury, they were selected at a particular time, and then they were selected along with hundreds of others to be impaneled for this jury, and then they were ultimately selected as time went. It's a huge burden for people to have to take. So people that are in any juries at all, it's part of our civic duty. I know a lot of people try to get out of jury trials and get out of jury duty. I would just encourage all of you not to. It's an important part of what we do. And if you see yourself as someone of good conscience and good civic faith, we need you as much as anyone is needed to be in these kinds of trials, because it's just a crucial piece to all that. So that's probably the largest news story sort of roaming around in my head today, and at least the one that feels to me to be the most significant is that as of today, this will be in the hands of the jury. And look, I have these fits of fear that something like a hung jury will come back. I don't have any fear that Derek Chauvin's going to be found not guilty, because that would take all the jurors to agree that he's not guilty. That just doesn't seem at all like a reasonable fear to have. By the way, the prosecuting team has been making this big distinction in the trial, if you've been watching it, of the difference between a risk and a threat. Because for a police officer to use excessive force or to use force, there has to be a threat present. And that's different in legal terms and for police between what is a risk. So they would say, well, lots of things can present a risk. They would use this example that, I don't know, a person of great physical stature, or a person with their hands in their pockets, or a person who's walking toward you. All of those are a risk, but an officer has to determine, am I actually threatened here? Do I need you to take your hands out of your pocket? Do I need to call somebody else in because I have a sense of physical intimidation? Are you walking at me in a way that's going to be helpful to me or is going to be a threat to me? So they have to distinguish between a threat and a risk. It's been sort of a helpful way to think about a lot of things around this trial. And so using that as the metaphor, yes, there's a risk that all the jurors could find Derek Chauvin not guilty on all accounts. That's a possibility. There's a risk of that. I don't think it's a threat. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to be unnerved by. Could one or more jurors not be willing to go along with the others in a guilty verdict? That's a threat. That's a real possibility. That could happen on all the charges. That could happen on one of them or two of them. And while there is something more than a risk and probably a threat that this country, this city that I love and live in, it will explode if after everything we've seen, if after the state of Minnesota can bring all that it has to bear of the justice system to declare that Derek Chauvin is guilty of manslaughter and second and third degree murder, if all of that can be brought to bear, this that the system of prosecution is saying he's guilty, and then 12 jurors, 12 citizens say, no, we disagree with you, or one or two say we disagree with you and agree that you have not met your burden of prosecution. That's a kind of complication that's just hard to live with. I mean, that is, it's all mixed up, right? Where then the system is saying guilty, and yet some selection of our fellow citizens are saying we can't go along with that. It is just going to be pain galore. And if Derek Chauvin is found guilty on all three or multiple charges here, that's not going to solve for all the other issues. We know that in this very same community, just miles away, Dante Wright was then killed by a police officer while this very trial is going on. So we should not tell ourselves that if police are brought to justice, that will solve for this problem. So, okay, that's one of the news stories we're going to talk about today. I just want to give my encouragement of what's the common good. Dan, producer Dan, co-host today. Dan, any thoughts from you on this particular topic?
No, it's just so heavy, and it weighs on all of us, but especially our Black friends and our friends of color. I just can't imagine the way this re-traumatizes people I love, and to have to not just see the trial and relive that, but to see that that it hasn't stopped. That even as this trial is taking place, there's more acts of police violence and death at the hands of police. In Chicago, with a 13-year-old boy, where the body cam shows that he has his hands up and he's shot dead anyways. It's just horrifying and unbelievable that this continues to happen. We thought body cameras would solve it, but clearly it hasn't. We see with our own eyes what's happening and what our brothers and sisters of color have been saying for decades and centuries now, that violence is being perpetrated against them by those in power. We thought that video cameras being in everyone's pocket would help that, but it's just shown that no, we don't. As a society, we don't care enough to change this.
That is exactly the feeling I have. It's just so much. And Dana in the chat is saying, can we discuss the choosing of the jurors? Sure. I'm going to tell you what I know about it. They were selected just like every other jury. And, I currently don't have great consternation about who they are. I don't know the alternates, and there's something on the screen now. If you're looking at that, you'll see that of the 15 jurors, which included the 3 alternates that existed, and there were 2 for the remainder of the trial. There was one just for a very short period of time because one juror was saying that they were feeling sick, so they added an extra one, and then it was only around for a day, I guess. But it's a mix of white women, 6 white women, 3 black men, 2 multiracial women, 3 white men, 1 black woman. Racially, it's got that kind of mix. People 10 of them are under the age of 50. 1 of them is in their 20s. 5 are in their 50s or older, and the oldest one is in their 60s. So I don't know. It's people 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It feels like that's sort of a mix. They were doing, what you have to do in a trial like this to wind them up. Just as an anecdote, I will say that in the jury trial that I was in, we were all asked a lot of questions about police because it was a crime and there was a series of details about it that involved the police and so on. And so we were asked our opinions about the police. Then we got into the jury box and certain people then, people just start talking and saying things. And there were lots of people saying things totally opposite of what we all heard one another say during our jury interview. About what we thought about the police or what we thought about criminals or what we thought about people who are arrested. So now we ended up, very much trusting each other, but just knowing that what we all said in interviews and what we said in there, they were different. And a real kind of collegiality had to be formed of trust in one another and helping people sort of come around the corner and be helped by others. So it was a very collaborative process and created a jury sensibility. Just in the one that I was in. I don't know if that's typical. I don't know if that's what would happen here. But you kind of get a jury mind when you're in there. And the one that I was on was a week long of case, of evidence, and then took us 5 days, 4.5 days to come to a verdict. And had to go back to the judge at one point and ask a bunch of questions, and we almost couldn't come to a verdict. Like it was arduous. And I know how much I spent thinking about that case every day from the first day of evidence all the way through the weeks after deliberation. Like I dreamed about it. It was the only thing I could think about. It was obsessive. It was just all encompassing. So I just have such empathy for these jurors and what they're going in. Dana, I would love to talk more about, I see your comment here. You were talking about the selection. I don't know. So maybe you can write a bit more there and we'll come back to that one in a minute. Hey, a couple other things that are also happening that are along the same line. The mass shooting in Indianapolis that was over the weekend, where the 4 members of the Sikh community were killed, 4 others, and this man who committed the murders and then killed himself is one of those people who the police knew about, whose mom was worried about. His mom had said that she was concerned that he was going to be pursuing death by police, which is a way that some people want to die. And so the police and FBI got involved and actually took a rifle away from him that he had owned. And then he was able to go out and buy 2 assault rifles. I know some people don't like them being called that. I call them that. They're assault style rifles. So then he was able to go out and buy those and then commit this crime. There are some weapons that we should not have in our society. I'm on the side where we shouldn't have any unless you're a registered hunter and then you have to go check it out of a place and use it only in a hunting place and check it back in. That's be my opinion about how we should deal with weapons. Other people are much less restrictive than that. They think that individuals should be just having them around their house. I just think we shouldn't have assault style weapons, and we shouldn't have any weapon that can fire bullets faster than a human body can load them. That seems totally reasonable to me. But that's not what our current laws are, and there seems to be no energy on behalf of anyone who sets the laws at the federal level or even the state level to make those laws the case. So and then there were a number of other mass shootings, some that resulted in the number of deaths that are required for it to be declared a mass shooting, and other times just the number of times that a person is shot. And you'll know that there were like 56 or 58 of them since Joe Biden has become the president of the United States, almost one a day. And many of those are in domestic situations. And as we've mentioned on this podcast before, they're not often determined by the press to be a mass shooting if the victims know the perpetrator or know one another and the perpetrator. So in other words, domestic assaults, which often will have multiple deaths and shootings, are not categorized by some people's standards as being mass shootings. So one of the ways that we get conflicting stories about how many mass shootings there are. And there are hundreds of them in this country every year. It's, as President Biden put it, it is an epidemic, and it is a shame. But the country as a whole, public opinion is 70, 80% want there to be gun limitations that don't exist, and yet Congress doesn't do it. And there's no set of conditions by which a violent act is going to get Congress to come around and agree with the American people. Congress has been shot at themselves, Congress people, including at a baseball game, including a sitting member of Congress, Gabby Giffords. Children in elementary schools and kindergartens have been killed. People at concert goers, all the places you could think about, religious spaces, military complex, everywhere. And nothing seems to move people away from this. So what it is that's keeping this locked in place makes no sense to me. And if you ever talk to your congressional leader and they bring up something about we have to be careful about Second Amendment rights, the First Amendment is the right, is the first right to every American citizen is the right to life, then liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your right to have a gun, for the love. And I just got to say, I know hunters. Okay, I'm going to rant. Here we go. I know hunters keep saying there's good law-abiding gun owners. We shouldn't be thrown in this. Well, you are thrown in it. We can't keep just being sure that your private gun rights are the most important thing. There's a problem. This feels so much like the pandemic to me. I feel like how Anthony Fauci had to say to Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio, that when Jim Jordan was questioning him last week at the congressional hearing and said to him, Dr. Fauci, when are we going to get back our liberties? And Fauci said, this is not about liberties. This is a public health hazard and a pandemic. It's not about if you have to wear a mask. This shouldn't be about if you get to have a gun. It's a public health hazard. All right, I'm not going to go anymore. It's maddening to me.
Yeah, it's just wild that we keep having these discussions.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. And I know that for all the, I know there's this thing about there's all these gun owners. There's not all these gun owners. I think, 25 million people own guns or something like this in the country. There's 350 million people. Most of us don't own guns. So even this idea, there's just everybody owns a gun. No,
but there's
don't.
Enough guns that there's more guns than people in the country. But
it's more guns than people. Think about that. More guns than people. Like 25 million people own guns, which means people are owning like dozens of them. The general who was in charge of the forces in Afghanistan, the guy that gave the call to kill Osama bin Laden, that guy, he was just on the Sunday shows on Sunday, and one of the Sunday news shows, and he was talking about this, and he said, look, I'm a gun owner. I own more guns than any reasonable person should. And he was kind of bragging about his like gun arsenal that he has at his house. Can we just knock all that stuff off and just see these things as it's like the tobacco industry and tobacco industry people bragging about I got 50 packs, cigarettes sitting in my house. And sure, I know they're a cancer causer. Sure, I know that they've been pitched to kids. Sure, I know that they've created a health hazard and created all this problem. But you know how many I've got? Don't take mine away from me. Like, good grief, we have no smoking rules. Let's have no gun rules everywhere but shooting ranges and established hunting zones. How about that? And then we can all talk about how you need to protect yourself from the government. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that.
You think you're really going to be able to protect yourself from
weak.
the government with your handgun? You're going to protect yourself from a tank and a drone.
A drone.
And
yeah.
it just this militia argument and all the. I am intolerant of it. I'm also a little tired and crabby today, so I'm really fed up to here with just another time when we're going to have to talk about gun stuff. So maybe I stop talking about gun stuff. Maybe that's the way out. Maybe the common good way for this guy is to stop talking about it until something new happens.
Well, we'd love to talk about something else, but guns keep putting themselves in the news because people keep being killed by them.
Good line. Guns keep popping in. All right. So, hey, on another front of weaponry, Biden has finally decided to end the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. And people are asking, boy, why can't we let go of these wars? We just can't seem to break up with our war addiction, whether it's a war on drugs, a war on poverty, a war in Afghanistan, a war on our streets. We love the narrative of a war, this country. And they haven't gone well. in our country. I mean, war has been a failed project. At least in my lifetime, every war we've been in has kind of ended in a way that's like, yeah, that didn't go so well. Again, the metaphoric wars, as well as the ones where we put soldiers with rifles and killing other people. Lots of people have been killed. Lots of people have been harmed. Lots of countries have been ripped apart. Lots of cold and hot wars have destroyed the lives of soldiers on every side, including U.S. citizens. And yet we just can't seem to let go of these things. And this fear and fear and fear that what if we don't have 2,500 people in Afghanistan, then someone's going to come and get us. Yeah. Look, the failure of intelligence around 9/11, knowing what's going on, is not because we didn't have warriors on the ground. It's not because we didn't have border walls built. It's not because we didn't have guys in armed boats on the Rio Grande or on the northern shore of Lake Superior. It's because we didn't listen to the information that was coming in. Everything about this. By the way, there's this great podcast called Blind Spot about 9/11. It's not a conspiracy one. It's a great one. Really worth listening to and watching. It was a PBS documentary, and they turned it into a podcast called Blind Spot. I promise you, if you like this podcast at all, if you're watching this at all, yeah, talking to you, Dana and Melissa and Mike, you'd love this thing. It's really great. And it will tell you about all the time that the failure was not a failure of military might. It was a failure of imagination and of listening and of communication and of interagency cooperation, all of which war footings do away with. They put you into combat mode. They put you into isolation mode. They put you into fulfill one particular duty and not all of them. They're the opposite of what you want. I just can't say it enough. War is a bad strategy for winning conflicts. War is just a bad idea. It's like the last option, should always be the last option. And once you've gotten there, it's because there's been failures all along the system, right? It's that's the moment one finds themselves in. It's a failure of magic. So I'm glad we're getting out of Afghanistan. That doesn't mean their government shouldn't have relationships with the Taliban, government that's in part of Afghanistan and with the Afghani government, and we shouldn't be engaged. Yeah, we should be there with full State Department and full. Our government should be involved with countries all over the world. We should be very international. Our posture in other countries should not be as warriors. And then people are like, well, we stayed in Germany and we stayed in South Korea and we've stayed in Japan and we've stayed in these other places. Yeah, that's not a good idea just because we've been doing it. I don't know. There are the arguments that come in around war to me and this perpetual war or sometimes war. It's just not. I don't know. It's not captivating to my mind about how we think about this. So anyway, we're getting out of Afghanistan finally by September 11th in some sort of act of, I don't know, decade poetry. That September 11th would be the time we'd finally be out after 20 years of being in. I did hear that, there are soldiers there who serve now in the same war that their dads served in. That some of these now 19-year-olds, their dad went in when their dad was 19, and then this kid was born, and now he's there.
Well,
so
and soldiers that are over there now that weren't born when the towers fell. It's been going on so long that they weren't even alive when it started.
All right, so Dana writes this thing in the chat. You're like a well-informed civilian Hawkeye Pierce. So, Dan, I don't know if you know this, but on a regular basis, people suggest that I look like, who is that guy that plays Hawkeye Pierce on MASH? Now I've lost his. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Dana, save me here. You don't know the TV show MASH, I'm guessing.
I know of it. I'm not.
Oh, how have I forgotten his name right now?
The actors.
Oh, he's super famous. He's in all kinds of things. Yeah, anyway, but I'm often, people tell me, boy, you look a lot like that guy. So, Dana, I'll take that as a little comment. is a good comment. All right. Okay. So speaking of, international things with Biden, another thing I think is worth paying attention to, and we're going to be spending a lot. Alan Alda. Thank you, Lisa. Alan Alda.
Yeah.
Yeah. People say I look like Alan Alda.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, Young Lee is somebody who told me that. She's Korean. She said, "Oh, we Korean women of my generation." She's about my age, early 50s. She said we really had a crush on Alan Alda. It was kind of a mash up thing. So she meant it as the greatest compliment. But I said he's kind of old. And all right, so refugees and the Biden administration. We're going to be talking about this a lot with the coming fall because Vote Common Good is going to spend a lot of time trying to move our nation's thought about our immigration policy and our refugee policy and how we treat the borders and trying to humanize the experience of immigration. And then guess what happens this week? George W. Bush comes out with a book that includes his artwork, his paintings of immigrants, and the whole point of his book that George W. Bush released this week is trying to help people understand the human stories of migrants in the United States. Well, we're going to be riding our bikes from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, from September 10th to November 13th, much of that along the southern wall border, all the way down from San Diego. We're going to go all the way down to Brownsville, Texas, all the way along that border. We'd love for you to come with us, whether you're going to be on a bike cycling with us, whether you're going to be putting together your own biking events in your town with immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers to make this human contact and personal story. We want you doing that. We're calling it We the People, a border tour for common good, immigration, and border practices. How about that for a mouthful? But anyway, we're going to be engaging in this great conversation about the human lives and the people who live along the border. They understand what needs to happen. We're going to visit almost all of the migration sites and border crossing sites on bikes in person, looking people in the eye. You don't have to come for all 2 months. No, who's got time for that? Maybe you come for a week. Maybe you come for a day. Maybe you come down for a month. I don't know. And rumor has it that we're going to be providing transportation on e-bikes for people who want a little electric assistance when they pedal. So anyway, that's all going to be going on. So we're going to be talking a lot about refugees, migrants, asylum seekers. What's the difference? What are the policies? We got a whole lot of really great ideas about what we need to do in this country that come from some of the best thinkers. There's a interesting article out that we're going to try to have the author on to talk about his provocative article. He says that there's a lucrative border industrial complex that keeps the U.S. border in constant crisis, which is really interesting. He writes in this article, he writes that at the beginning of the current strategy in the United States, which is to try to make the border less accommodating in order to keep migrants away, which is something that goes all the way back to the Clinton administration when they went to this policy idea. At the beginning of this policy in 1994, under the Bill Clinton administration, the annual border and immigration budget was $1.5 billion. And most of that, almost all of it, came through immigration and naturalization services side of the federal government. In 2020, Dan, the combined budget of the superseding agencies, Custom Border Protection, Immigration and Custom Enforcement like ICE, National Homeland Security, current budget, $25 billion a year. That's a 16-fold increase from 1.5 billion to 25 billion. Now, look, there's been a little inflation since 1994, but not enough to take you from 1.5 billion to 25 billion. So there's something going on in our current border industrial complex. And a lot of it has to do with all the private industry that has come up around the border, from detention centers to processing centers to delivery systems of all that supports it. An entire infrastructure over the last 30 years has been built around our border, including the horrible border wall itself, where we should be building our bridges and processing centers. Instead, we're building walls. Totally the wrong approach to any country that has a neighbor. But that's what we've done. And all of that's created this huge infrastructure that now has everybody trapped in some sort of, like one of those little paper finger jails that you get your finger in, where every time you move any one direction, you're stuck. So we have this bloated, huge system. So that's why, interestingly, for all of you conservatives out there and people that have conservative friends that say, you know what we want? We want greater efficiency. You know what we want? We want less waste. You know what we want? We want more order. You know what we want? We want more consistency and reliability. Well, what our current border and refugee and asylum seek process has is none of that. It's bloated, it's inflated, it's giving money to people that are not providing for the common defense or for the common migration patterns of the United States, and it's disorderly as can be. There's not even a way to get in line to be a refugee. There's not even a way to get in line to be a migrant. So we have a disordered, bloated, wasteful system. And you want to double down on it? Where are all these Republicans stepping, other than, George W. Bush stepping up to say migrants are the best part of America, because that's all of us. We're indigenous and migrant peoples in this country. That's who we are. So there's a lot to do. And Biden got this one wrong. Biden blew this one this week. They promised they were going to take the refugee number that the Trump administration had put on at a cap that was like 15 million. Supposed to bust that thing all the way up. 62, from 15 to 62.
And then they sort of quietly said, we're not going to do that.
We can't do that quite yet. Yeah. You know what you did? You figured out how to do it in like 5 hours because people were like, no, this matters. And I don't know why the Biden administration has a blind spot on this. Part of the reason we're doing our work at Vote Common Good to raise this is because not every administration is going to get everything right. We have this great saying around Vote Common Good that getting ourselves a new president isn't going to solve every problem, but the president shouldn't be the problem. So we got to get rid of Donald Trump. So now we got a new president. No, he can't solve every problem. So we got to help him. So we got to help him make sure that these stay priorities. And that's what we're going to be doing. And we're going to try to help voters know that there's a common good immigration and border policy practices approach that you can take. So if this is firing you up already, listen to this. I promise you, over the next 6 months, you're going to hear a lot from us about this, because I think this is a real strength for people of common good sensibilities. This is very solvable, by the way. It's human-centric, and the solving of it means it's better for people. And anything we can do with real change that makes real people's lives really better, we should do it. And that's something we think can happen in this.
And I think it was disappointing that the Biden administration got this wrong to start with, but it was encouraging that they listened to the criticism and turned things around. So I think that's positive. Some people will be like, oh, they backed down, like it's a sign of weakness.
Totally.
But no, they listened to the people that raised their voices and said, we think this is important, and you said you would do it, so do it.
Yeah, I just wish they would just say the dreaded words. Hey, we were wrong about how we rolled this out. We took a wrong-headed approach. What we said did disservice, and we've changed now, and we're now doing the right thing. We did wrong, and now we're doing right. They've come really close to that by kind of a subtle walk back, but it's one of those things that people in public spaces do, whether you're politicians or entertainers or leaders. We're loathed to want to say, as a human race, I was wrong. But this administration could pull that one off. I wish they would have on this one. Just said, hey, we were wrong about this. If Biden had said, I need to put a different emphasis on this, we hear you. We've made some adjustments, and we're going to do it this way. Now they're doing that, but they're sort of describing it in a way that I think the description could be more accurate. You got this one wrong, and now you're going to make it right. I mean, if righting wrongs is not what we do, then what are we doing? Getting it right all the time? Like whom? Like whom? Did I get whom right? Did I get whom right? Or whichever it is, I will write that wrong and say who. Whoever who has gotten it right every time, well, good for you. Good for you. The rest of us, we got to backtrack a little bit. Speaking of backtracking, who had to backtrack, Dan, on this little news story? Johnson & Johnson, those guys with the J&J vaccine, because they came out and said, I mean, we're not the only people with blood clots caused by our vaccines. So did Moderna and Pfizer. And then somebody who works on all that study said, no, they didn't. So now J&J is under scrutiny for making public statements dogging, down talking the other vaccines. This is where you don't want things to go, right? All the upsides that there are to there were to Operation Warp Speed, of getting the government moving, of invoking the Defense Production Act, which I'm so glad that Joe Biden did, so that the takeovers and the pressures of the federal government on industry can be affected and effectual. So here we go. They've done it. And now you've got private industry that are in on all this, right? And then all of a sudden private industry starts to say things like, hey, we've got other things to be thinking about too, like our reputation and some of the rest. And so they've come out and said others. And just to be clear, the people who studied this say no. Moderna and Pfizer do not have the same issues with these blood clots. And the number of blood clots with J&J seems to still be really small, but the worry for everyone is this just what we know, and do we not have enough reporting? And I guess by Friday, we're going to know about this. Having said all of that, I hope you will still get your vaccines and not be held back by such things, because the vaccine is really key to all of us moving this thing forward. Just think of it as like, having no smoking rules in your hospitals and airplanes. It just is the smart way to go. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Maybe it sets aside some level of what you'd prefer to do, but generally speaking, it's worth it. It's wearing shoes in a restaurant, not going barefoot, that kind of thing. So it's what it seems to me needs to happen. All right. Two more on the news roundup here on this Monday. Bernie Madoff died in prison. Bernie Madoff, who is famous for the greatest Ponzi scheme and ripped off all kinds of people. A tragic story, and another one of these stories where what you find out when you get into the details is it's not just having the right laws, because there were laws in place that made what Bernie Madoff did a crime. It's not just having the enforcement available to those laws, because the enforcement groups were available to have prevented Bernie Madoff from doing this. But the people effectuating those laws through the agencies that were in charge, those people couldn't imagine that Bernie Madoff could have been guilty of these things. Once again, this great phrase that I love so much, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. That's where the trouble comes. So there's all kinds of assumptions that we walk around of many a thing. That's the stuff that gets you in trouble. It's not that you're ignorant. It's that you know something for sure that's not true. And there are people who just believe that Bernie Madoff couldn't possibly be a criminal. So they set aside all the normal practices. Now, of course, you don't want to go around assuming everyone's a criminal, but there were people calling them and telling them this isn't right what he's doing. And then he would just say, come on, I'm not the kind of guy who could do that. And if you want to know what privilege looks like, and if you want to know what assumption of being the good guy versus the bad guy look like, you take the story of Bernie Madoff, who could bilk people out of billions of dollars, commit all kinds of crimes at the fiscal level, financial level, which are really carefully watched and prosecuted. There's multiple agencies that watch this stuff. Why'd you get away with it? Because someone like Bernie just couldn't be a guy who causes that kind of problem. What does Derek Chauvin say about George Floyd when he's leaving the murder scene and getting in his car and he's challenged by the witness who was there? And he says, well, he's a big guy and he's probably on something. Oh, so that kind of guy you're sure is the problem. Bernie Madoff is the kind of guy who you're sure is not the problem. This is what sits in our society. Some people are assumed to be the good guy, couldn't do a thing wrong. Some people are assumed to be the bad one who's likely going to have done something wrong. It's those assumptions. It's the beginning level of assumptions. This is how it goes. Sometimes that's race. Sometimes that's gender. Sometimes that's culture. Oftentimes it's all of those. So black males behaving in a certain way are treated much differently than white males behaving in other ways, even if their actual criminality is not related at all to these assumptions. This is what implicit bias is. We walk around all day operating under implicit bias all the time. That's how we get along. And then we realize that our biases are rooted in something false and that they're actually harmful, then we have to change them. That's what's going on. And that's why this whole thing about Bernie Madoff, I think, should be so deeply connected to the other social issues that are happening in our world. All right, just a couple minutes left. And let's talk about the America First Caucus. Dan, we're going to save a little bit of this for Tuesday, tomorrow with Rob, because I'm sure Rob's going to want to go off about this. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congresswoman Boebert from Colorado and a number of others wanted to put together a caucus. Now, if you don't know what a caucus is, no reason you should, but it's a way of organizing inside of a system. So at the congressional level for House members, they'll put together a certain group, and then that group will meet together and vote together and put together policies. It's kind of a little working group, and they call it a caucus. And so they'll get sort of organized for internal rules inside of how bills are put together and passed. And that it's because there's no way any one congressperson can know enough about every single bill that's going to be passed. I mean, no person could read all of them, understand the details. So what you do is you organize yourself with others so that people in your cluster, in your group, will help you to understand the things that you might have missed on your own. So if your caucus goes along with it, you have a pretty good sense that something you would agree with because you tend to think similarly around some organizing principles, and that gets you a long way. So there's a lot of good function for having a caucus. Well, these guys decide they're going to put together an America First caucus, and they wrote up their paper, and now they pulled back and said, no, we were never actually going to do this as a caucus. This was just a brainstorm. We were just coming up with some possible options. We got a little header, had a designed logo, had, 13 pages of articulated views, but we're just spitballing here. And they put this thing together, and lo and behold, it is immigration's a problem. We need to build America around an Anglo-Saxon normativity pattern. Yeah, full-on white supremacists. Like the stuff we thought was just sort of tucked away, and that Congresswoman Boebert from California and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the likes of Josh Hawley, even though he's a senator, and so on, and probably Ted Cruz, all the people that were behind the Stop the Steal, the whole Trumpian crowd, they just came flat out and said it. No, we want there to be an America built around people like us and have that be the standard by which everything else functions. And the pushback came like you would have thought, Biden had stepped back on his promise around refugee status. It hit these people. They had no idea that people would be so up in arms about a formal caucus in the United States Congress that stated purpose is blood and soil nativism of you are proper Americans, everyone else is not, they need to take on your culture. Now, that has been an argument that people have been making in America from the very beginning. It's part of what has driven so much of our cultural divide, but never before did somebody think that Congress people would be so naive, so bold, and so white supremacist as to make it the organizing principle of a congressional caucus.
Yeah, they just set down the dog whistles and pulled up the bullhorn and just said it real loud. We're not even trying to hide it. This is about being white like us. And we have to protect that. And America is that. It's just unbelievable. And I can't wait for you and Rob to dig in deeper with that one.
Well, we're going to dig in on this. All right. Well, Hey, thanks all for being a part of our news roundup. We like you to feel like there's a wide range of things that we care about around here. If you're wondering about our bike ride, in a matter of weeks, a website will be available. We're still working on getting a whole bunch of details together to save you all of the questions that you have rolling around in your head already about how this works. Like, what if I can't ride a bike? What if I don't want to ride a bike? Is there a way for me to go if I don't have a bike? How could I be involved if I want to be involved for a day? All of these questions that you're likely asking yourself about traveling from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, from saint to saint and coast to coast along the southern border. If that's something you're interested in and want to know more about, hold on for a bit. We're leaking this out to all of you because you're special to us, because you listen to the podcast and watch the live stream. Details are going to be coming quite soon on this. I'm very excited about it. Hope that you will consider joining us again, whether that's on the border, on your bike, in your town, wherever you find yourself. That we're going to get we the people rolling down the road of this country. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, is Tuesday. So around here, we call that Politics Day on the podcast, joined by Rob Ryerson. On Wednesday, we're joined by the pastors, Laura Truax, Stephanie Spalding, and Dominique Gilliard, and myself. On Thursdays, we look at particular issues, and we've got a big one coming up on the actual role of sex trafficking and the damage of human trafficking in this country. So we're going to be talking about that as an issue. And then on Friday, we're going to have a different person who works in space. She's a millennial who's got a whole movement of engineers to get us into space, sort of a part 2 from our conversation last Friday. So all of this, we hope, comes together. And if you are interested in our webinar on Tuesday nights on the threat of Christian nationalism, tomorrow night on the 20th is our session, and it involves Amanda Taylor from the group Christians Against Christian Nationalism. It's going to be just excellent. We have a pastor that's going to be on to be sharing with you all of the implications that it has meant for him in the work that he's been doing as a pastor. So that's tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central Time. You can figure out your time zones from there, right here wherever you're watching this, and it'll also be put together into a subset in our podcast if you're just a podcast listener. Thanks so much for being a part of it. It means a lot to all of us. If you're not already on our email list, head over there to Vote Common Good. Get on the email list. As we like to joke, don't miss the donate button. It really does keep us going and keeps us moving along. And to those of you who have been donating, because I see your donations and I see you on the chats, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. We hear you. We're glad that you hear us, and the people who are going to knock down this border wall are going to hear from all of us someday. That's a George W. Bush joke right there. So thanks for being with us, and we will see you tomorrow.